Hi there, today I'm going to show you how to clean up an issue in Marketo where incidentally a field value has changed and you want to revert that field value back to what it was originally. So today the example I'm going to go through is a real world example, and I'll give you a bit of context and background as to what happened. So we have this smart campaign that runs in Marketo and it scores our lead, and then we append on all the different scores a lead gets for certain activities to this behavior score 7-day history field. So anytime they have an activity, say in this case creating an API token, they're going to get points for that activity based on this token, and it's going to get appended to this field. And we do that for every activity that they get points for. So then at the very end of this smart campaign running and the end of this flow, the behavior score 7-day history now has all the points someone has, but this is for all time. So it's not just for today when they ran through the scoring mechanism, but it contains the points and scores they got every single time they went through the mechanism. And this is great because historically we can look back over a lead every time they were scored and see what they were getting points for, and it allows us to optimize the mechanism. Maybe they're getting too many points for one thing or too little points for another thing. But the downside to this is a field which we have mapped to Salesforce, and it has a 5,000 character limit in Salesforce. And sometimes this field starts overflowing and it gets truncated. And we want to avoid this from happening. So we have a webhook set up, which in this case I've called trim behavior score 7-day history abbreviated. And this basically sends a formula over to Whoosh, which says if the field is greater than 5,000 characters, trim it. So remove the earliest behavior score history blob so we can make room for the newest one, and then append the newest one to the field. So that's the way this formula should be working. However, I ran it for the first time yesterday, and what actually happened is sometimes Whoosh would return an empty result, and it was actually overwriting the behavior score 7-day field with nothing. So that obviously isn't desirable, and I want to revert back to this old value, which I'll show you how to do later on. Or then in other cases, it was trimming the field when there was no need. So the original field length was much lower than 5,000 characters, but the formula was still removing some initial activity blobs to make room for a blob at the end when there was no need. And this shouldn't be the case. I tested the formula in Google Sheets, but apparently the way the formula works in Google Sheets is different to the way the formula works in Excel, which is what Whoosh uses to evaluate the formula. In Google Sheets, if the field is greater than 5,000 characters, it'll truncate it. If it's less than or equal to 5,000 characters, it leaves it alone. But it seems that in Excel, the exact same formula, when implemented using this webhook and Whoosh, if it's greater than 5,000, it truncates it as we want. But if it's less than or equal to 5,000, it is still truncating it when there's no need. So that's why this happened unexpectedly, and why I want to revert back to original field values, because they were either replaced with empty strings or the fields were truncated unnecessarily. So that's a bit of context as to the issue I'm facing here and why I want to revert these change data actions so that I get the original field values back. Thankfully, Marketo has the bulk activity extract functionality with its API, and it allows us to do things like create a job where we specify the information we're interested in requesting, and it'll send us that information so we can parse out stuff we want related to the activity. So in this case here, we're going to create a job that's going to contain all the information about this change data value activity. And then we're going to be able to extract the old value and revert the leads field for behavior score 7-day history to this old value. So I'm going to jump into Postman now. So here in Postman, I've got our first request, which is going to create a job. And the important thing to note here is that these times must be in UTC time. And I was able to narrow down the range to look at by going to this smart campaign. And if I go to results and I put a custom filter on, which only looks at the call webhook activity, I can see that the webhook was called from 7:20 a.m. CST all the way to 7:11 a.m. CST. But as I mentioned, we need these times to be in UTC time. So 7 a.m. is 1300 in UTC time, so 1 o'clock. So it's going to go from 1310 to 1325. So we've been able to narrow down the window we need to search for using the results of that smart campaign. And then the next thing we want to filter on is the activity ID. So in this case, the activity ID we want to filter on is this change data value that's associated with the webhook. And I forgot to mention this previously, but when the webhook makes its calculation, the result of the calculation gets stored in the behavior score 7-day history field. So whenever the webhook gets called, it's going to cause that change data value to happen. And we can see the reason for this change data value is webhook updated person, and it gives the name of the webhook. So even though this change data value is before the actual call webhook in the log, the webhook call comes first, and then it's the change data value in reality. So we're looking for the change data value action, but we need to know what activity type ID that is. So if you make another API request, which in this case is called getActivityType, and you use this endpoint, it then returns all the activity types in your instance. And then when I searched for data value, it gave me the change data value action, and it let me know that the ID is number 13. So if you're searching for the logs on any of this, so let's go to creating a job. Here's the first call we're going to make, and it gives you information about how to apply additional filters. And then if you want to make that call that I just mentioned about getting the activity type ID, if you go here, you go open new link, that brings you to all the information you need to make this get activity types call. And let's go back to Postman. So we're going to go back to our create a job. We now know the activity type ID is 13. Then we want to filter on the change data values to the behavior score 7-day history field only. Because if you just did this alone, that would return a lot of data. If you just filtered on the change data value flow action, that would still give you a lot of data. But you can filter down even further by saying, I want to look at changes to the behavior score 7-day history field within this time window affected by the change data value action. So in order to find this, the docs are actually very helpful. We can specify the lead field we want to filter on. And if you go to the describe lead action and you make this request in Postman, it lists every single field that you have in your instance on the lead. So I just searched for 7-day when this information was returned, and I see that the ID for this field is 2398. So then I go back to my create a job and then I put in 2398. So this is going to be the call we send to Marketo to create the job. We're telling Marketo search for changes to the behavior score 7-day history field due to the change data value action between these two times. So we're going to create the job, and that's going to return this export ID. So then we're going to copy this export ID, and then once the job is created, we actually have to put it in the queue. So then we go to the path variables, we paste that in here, and then Marketo will tell us it's been put in the queue and the status is queued. And then the final part is getting the job data, but we can only get the job data once we know that the job has been completed. So if we go to poll job status, it will tell us once the job has been completed. So you can poll this as many times as you want. And then once it says completed, you know you're ready to go to the get job data action. And the important thing to note here is that it'll take a while to run. So you again put in the export ID, and then you'll notice that this took me 43 seconds for this request. But then once that did happen, I got all the output data here in Postman. And the next step you're going to do is you're going to save this response, and you're going to save it to a CSV file so that we can import it into Google Sheets. So then when we import that CSV file from Postman into Google Sheets, this is what we get. We get the Marketo activity ID, we get the lead ID, the activity date, the ID of the action, which we know is 13, the campaign ID, we get the field ID for the behavior score 7-day history field, and then it gives the name of that field as well. And then we can see that so I was in the wrong sheet here, apologies. So we can see that this is the file we import from Postman, and we can see that during the time frame we're looking at, there are a lot of change data values to the behavior score 7-day history field. And if we just scroll through this, we'll see that a lot of them were done by the Smart campaign, but those aren't the ones we're looking for. See if we can find an example. We're looking for the changes that were made by the webhook, because the stuff done by the Smart campaign was correct, but we want to filter just on these columns alone. So I've done that in another sheet here. If you're not familiar or very good with Google Sheets, you can just go attributes, filter by condition. This might take a while because it's a big sheet. So that other sheet was too big and taking too long. So I'll show you in here. You can go filter by condition, text contains, and then you can just put webhook in here, and then it will isolate all the changes to the behavior score 7-day history field made by the webhook. And then in this payload for the reason, we can see that it contains the new value, and it also contains the old value in here as well. I'm not able to find it at the moment, it's quite messy, but trust me that the old value is in there too. And then using some regex formulas, the new value can be extracted, and so can the old value. And then I just have some very simple formulas here that say get the length of the new value and get the length of the old value. And as I mentioned previously, the formula worked correctly when the value of the old field was greater than 5,000. So as we can see here, it correctly truncated the old value and gave us back a shorter value that was less than 5,000 characters, so correctly fit in the field. But the issue, so if we go less than 5,000, the issue, as you mentioned, is that sometimes the webhook returned no result. It's not this one. Sometimes the webhook returned no result, which is what we're seeing here. Or sometimes it truncated the field when there was no need, because the old value is less than 5,000, but it's still truncated here. So these are the ones we want to focus on and fix. And one thing to note is that when you're doing a list import into Marketo, you can't do it using lead ID. You actually need the lead's email address. So I know all the leads that were affected by this webhook change this morning because I can create this smart list which says, look at the behavior score 7-day history field, which was changed, and the reason was because of this webhook. And then if I go to the people, I can create a very simple list view that just has ID and email, and it contains all the 616 people who are affected by this change. And then I can import that into this tab, which I call ID email mapping. And then this is just a quick formula that looks up the person's lead ID and then gets a corresponding email address. So then all that needs to be done is we copy this column, copy the old value column, and then we go to export. And then we download this as a CSV. And then in Marketo, we just create a new list. And then we import these people into that list. And that will automatically change the behavior score 7-day history field for all these leads back to the original value. So there you have it. That's how you can correct a mistake that happened when a field was inadvertently changed to a new value and you want to revert to the old value. You can use Marketo Bulk Activity Extract API, Postman, and Google Sheets to do so. Thanks very much for your attention. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.